The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Good evening, everyone, and welcome to tonight's webinar. We will be speaking about how to coach your children to develop healthy sleep habits. Our presenter tonight is Emmy Pichet. We're so glad to have her join us. A couple of housekeeping pieces prior to us getting started. In order for you to hear our presentation, you can hear through the mic and speakers attached to your computer, or you can phone in using the telephone option. In order to select either option, go under the GoToWebinar software on the side of your screen, go under the audio section and select either mic and speaker or the telephone option. If you select the telephone option, you will be provided with the phone number to call in. If you have any questions at any time, we're happy to answer them. Please enter them into the question panel on the GoToWebinar software, and we will get to them towards the end of the presentation. Our objectives for this evening are to become familiar with why sleep is so important to children's development and learning, to understand what healthy sleep looks like during different stages of development, to learn how to coach your child to develop healthy sleep habits, and to learn how to handle common sleep issues. There is a special offer associated with this evening's presentation. If you mention that you participated in our webinar this evening, we'll waive the administrative fee if you book an appointment between now and December 31st, 2017. Morneau Shepell supports over 500,000 people each year through therapy, education, and coaching. We provide assessments and treatments within the disciplines of psychology, speech-language pathology, behavior therapy, occupational therapy, physiotherapy, and special education. And we have clinics across Ontario, Quebec, as well as one in British Columbia, and we are also available online. Our presenter this evening is Mary Elizabeth Pichet, also known as ME. She is the co-founder and educational director of Whole Play Family Services, which offers parent and child play and development classes, as well as individualized parent support services to families with babies, toddlers, and preschoolers. She has an MA in counseling psychology, a master's in education in developmental psychology, and is also a PhD candidate in the developmental psychology and education, with a focus on early learning at the University of Toronto. She has over 10 years of experience working with families with young children on a variety of common developmental issues, such as sleep training, potty training, positive discipline, separation anxiety, transitioning to daycare, and more. She is a registered psychotherapist in Ontario. Now I'm going to turn it over to Emmy. We're so glad to have you here this evening.
Thank you so much for that introduction. There are just two other things that I wanted to mention about myself before getting started, and one is that I'm a parent of 2 children. I have a 6-year-old son and a soon-to-be 4-year-old daughter, both of whom I've had to sleep train on more than one occasion. So I know personally how challenging it can be on many different levels. The other thing I wanted to highlight about my background is that I use a developmental approach when viewing sleep and understanding sleep problems in children. What this essentially means is that I believe you cannot evaluate a child's sleep or solve his sleep issue without first taking his stage of development into account. And this is why I'm going to spend so much of this presentation talking about what sleep looks like during different stages of development, from the newborn stage to adolescence. With those two things in mind, I want to now look at the outline of this presentation. The information I'll be covering includes why sleep is so important, sleep statistics, what healthy sleep looks like during different stages of development, how to develop healthy sleep habits during different stages of development, common sleep problems and solutions to those problems, when and who to contact for sleep support, and then I'll try to leave about 10 minutes at the end of the presentation for questions and answers. I see by our poll, most of you guys have young children, so I'll try to focus much of the content on those ages and stages, just because I have a lot of material in this presentation. I wanted to include everything so that you would have access to it, but it will not be possible for me to go into deep detail on each slide that I have. So let's look first at the importance of sleep. How important is sleep? This is something we're continuing to learn about more and more every day, just how important sleep is to our functioning as human beings, and in particular, how important sleep is to our children's development and learning. Studies have shown that the number of hours and quality of sleep directly relates to school performance. And this is because when children get a good night's sleep, they are able to take in and retain information better. And this is the case for both our older and our younger learners. Poor quality sleep and insufficient sleep has also been linked to several developmental and health issues in children, including obesity, substance abuse, attention issues, mental health issues, and behavior problems. How prevalent are sleep problems? Unfortunately, it turns out they are very common, at least in this particular North American context. So 25 to 50% of infants have difficulties with night waking, and 50% have difficulties getting to sleep. Our toddlers, 25 to 30% of them experience bedtime resistance. 50% have problems with night waking. Preschoolers, 15 to 30% have difficulties falling asleep and problems with night waking. 15 to 25% of our school-age children experience bedtime resistance. 10% have difficulties falling asleep and experience anxiety at bedtime, and 10% experience daytime sleepiness. And finally, at least 20% of adolescents experience significant sleep problems. High achievers and kids with mental health issues are at increased risk for sleep issues. But why is this? Why are sleep problems so common in children today? This is by no means an exhaustive list, but some of the reasons include our social values, out of sync schedules that we have on a day-to-day basis. Difficulties with limit setting is going to be a big theme throughout this presentation. Our kids' sleep needs change as kids develop and grow. And there's a lack of information out there, conflicting information, and in some cases too much information on sleep, which can be quite confusing to parents. So hopefully the information that you will receive in this presentation will help to clarify some of what you've read or heard about. First of all, what is quality sleep? It turns out that quality sleep is not just about the amount of sleep an individual gets. Equally important is the kind of sleep an individual gets. And there are different sleep states. And the REM sleep state is very important. What it is, essentially, is, well, in a nutshell, our sleep is divided into REM sleep and non-REM sleep. Non-REM sleep is also called quiet sleep because our physiological processes such as breathing and heart rate are quiet or regular during non-REM sleep. REM sleep, on the other hand, is categorized by activity. During REM sleep, our physiological processes such as breathing and heart rate, and in particular eye movement, are active or irregular. And this is where REM sleep gets its name. REM stands for rapid eye movement because in the REM sleep state, our eyes move rapidly back and forth. REM sleep is also associated with dreaming and has been found to be central to neurological development and learning. The other thing that's important to know about REM and non-REM sleep states is that they alternate throughout the night in a series of cycles, and that brief arousals naturally occur after these cycles, which happens between 4 to 6 times a night, depending on one's age. Adult sleep cycles, typically speaking, are 90 to 110 minutes, whereas infant sleep cycles last approximately 50 minutes. What this essentially means is that waking up throughout the night is actually a natural and normal phenomenon for both kids and adults. Later, we will look at how this can become problematic, but for now, think of night waking as a completely normal part of the sleep process. The other thing I want to mention about REM sleep and non-REM sleep is that more REM sleep usually occurs during the latter part of the night and early morning hours. However, this is not the case during all developmental stages. So now let's take a look at what typical sleep looks like throughout different developmental stages. And as you're reading these slides, it's important to compare where your child is in terms of his sleep. So for newborns, the REM sleep state actually occurs first, and this is the only stage in development where this happens, where the REM sleep state occurs first, as soon as newborns fall asleep. And REM sleep comprises 50% of their sleep. Newborns also sleep a lot. They sleep approximately 16 hours per day, and their sleep is evenly distributed throughout the day and night. They also sleep for shorter periods of time, mostly because of their need to eat frequently. Infants 3 to 6 months start to enter the non-REM sleep state first. REM sleep declines. Infants of this age sleep approximately 13 hours per day, with 2/3 of their sleep occurring at night. So already by 3 to 6 months, infants are starting to sleep more at night than during the day. They develop 15-minute sleep cycles. Similarly, infants 6 to 12 months have 15-minute sleep cycles. They sleep approximately 12 hours per day, with them losing the late nap. I'll talk more about that later. Infants of this age also will start sleeping through the night, 9 to 11 hours per night. What does typical sleep look like during toddlerhood? Our younger toddlers sleep approximately 11 to 13 hours per day. They have 1 to 2 shorter naps per day, and their sleep cycles start to increase. Our older toddlers sleep approximately 11 to 13 hours per day. They lose their morning nap and have a longer afternoon nap. REM sleep continues to decline during the later stage of toddlerhood, and sleep cycles continue to increase. Our preschoolers, our 3 to 5-year-olds, sleep approximately 11 to 12 hours per day. Most preschoolers lose their nap by 5 years old. There are high levels of deep sleep that occur during this stage of development. Typically speaking, preschoolers take longer to fall asleep than our babies and our toddlers. They take approximately 17 to 19 minutes to fall asleep, and their sleep cycles are 90 minutes long. School-aged children also take about 17 to 19 minutes to fall asleep, and they sleep approximately 9 to 10 hours. REM sleep occurs late at night and early in the morning, more like adults and school-aged children. By the time our kids reach adolescence, their sleep resembles adult sleep in the fact that REM sleep and the sleep cycles reach adult levels. However, one difference between adolescents and adults is that they experience a 2-hour phase delay, which means that adolescents like to go to bed late and also wake up late, and that is a physiological phenomenon. So now that we've looked at what typical sleep looks like during these different developmental stages, let's take a look at what we can do to create healthy sleep habits at each stage, starting with our newborns. I'm going to warn you in advance that I'm going to go through these slides pretty quickly, just so I can make sure I cover all the information. But later on in the presentation, when I talk about how to solve common sleep problems, I will go through this content in greater detail, since much of it overlaps. So during the newborn stage, we aren't so much concerned with regulating their sleep patterns as we are focused on regulating all their physiological systems. And how do we do this? We hold them. We have tons of skin-to-skin contact. We feed them on demand. We let them sleep when they want to sleep. And we try to meet all their needs as best we can. One thing I do want to highlight about this developmental stage is that it is a high-risk period for SIDS, which is what the second bullet point, placing babies on their backs, is all about. I will talk more about the SIDS later on in the presentation, but for now I want to move on to the next stage of development. Our infant stage, our younger infants, our 3 to 6 month olds. Here are some things, some tips that you can do to start to create healthy sleep habits if you have an infant of this age. You can start to put him down. You can start to develop a regular bedtime routine, including a bath. You can start to put them down for a regular bedtime each night, so it's the same time each night. You can start to put them down sleepy but awake. You put them down on their backs until they can roll. You can wait a few minutes before picking them up if they're crying out for you to encourage self-soothing. And you can start to reduce your presence around bedtime, as well as the stimulation you give them in order to get them settled. Finally, you can start to phase out their late nap. So that's the nap that occurs around 4 p.m. You can start to phase that out. For our older infants, again, we don't want to allow this late nap, so we're not going to put them down after 3 to 4 p.m. We're going to start a 2, 3, 4 sleep schedule with naps occurring in the crib. I'm going to talk more about that schedule in just a bit. We're going to move up their bedtime. We're going to maintain a regular, relaxing bedtime routine. We're going to limit parental presence and stimulation at naps, bedtime, and through the night, and eliminate night feedings. Moving on to our toddlers. Again, we're going to not allow our toddlers to have a late nap. We're going to continue with the 2, 3, 4 sleep schedule with naps occurring in the crib. We're going to limit parental presence and stimulation around naps, bedtime, and through the night. And we're going to continue the regular relaxing bedtime routine. We're going to get rid of the bottle and skip morning nap and put down for an earlier afternoon nap when necessary. By 18 to 36 months, we can phase out the morning nap. We can put down our toddlers for an early afternoon nap instead. Again, we're going to limit our presence around nap time, bedtime, and through the night. Maintain a regular, relaxing bedtime routine. Use comfort items and a special grow clock or any clock that encourages self-sufficiency in the morning or during the night. And we're going to transition the toddler out of the crib once he or she understands the need to stay in bed at night and in the morning. Our preschoolers, we're going to continue the afternoon nap as needed, encourage daily quiet time, maintain regular relaxing bedtime routine, limit parental presence and stimulation at bedtime and through the night, and use comfort items and a special clock to encourage self-sufficiency in the morning and during the night. Our school-age children, we're going to alternate physical activity with downtime. We can talk to kids about the importance of sleep. We can maintain regular bedtimes even on the weekends, continue relaxing bedtime routine, limit our presence and stimulation at bedtime, limit sugar and caffeine in their diet, and limit screen use before bedtime. And finally, for our adolescents, we're going to alternate physical activity with downtime. Again, we can talk to our adolescents about the importance of sleep. We're going to try to maintain a regular bedtime even on the weekends. We're going to try to limit sugar and caffeine in the diet, limit screen use and cell phone use before bedtime, allow kids to sleep in when possible, and avoid late afternoon naps. Now, that is, of course, easier said than done. Here's a picture of the various factors that go into achieving optimal sleep, whether it's for our children or for ourselves. As you can see, there are a lot of different variables at play. I don't really have time to go deeply into all of them, but I do want to draw your attention to the box on the left-hand side in the middle, which is the sleep practices. This is what we're going to be focusing on now when we turn to common sleep issues in children and how to solve them. For our newborns, our 0 to 3 month olds, most sleep issues are actually a result of parental expectations being out of line with developmentally normal and appropriate sleep behaviors. So some of these issues include frequent waking out of hunger, day and night reversal, irregular sleep patterns, and active sleep or REM sleep versus quiet sleep. But again, these aren't necessarily problems as so much as they are just a reflection of the way that newborns typically sleep. So there's not really anything to do about them. However, one sleep issue for newborns that's not so much a sleep issue, but more of a health issue is, of course, SIDS. While we don't know exactly what causes SIDS, we do know that there are various risk factors involved. There are extrinsic risk factors that relate to the sleep environment of the infant, intrinsic risk factors that relate to the physiology of the infant, and then there's the particular developmental stage of the infant. Infants are at the highest risk for SIDS between the ages of 2 and 4 months. So what can we do to lower the risk of SIDS? Well, chances are that you're already familiar with these safe sleep recommendations, but it never hurts to review them again. For the interest of time, I'm not going to read through them all, but I did want to point out that some sleep experts, such as James McKenna, argue that bed sharing or sleeping in the same bed as your infant is perfectly safe, and that they've been shown to reduce the risk of SIDS when certain conditions are in place, such as breastfeeding. So if you are currently bed sharing with your infant, or if you're interested in bed sharing, James McKenna is a very good resource for you to read. Common sleep problems in infancy include the inability to self-soothe, the inability to consolidate sleep or to sleep through the night, bad habits or sleep associations when falling asleep, waking throughout the night, which can be developmentally normal, as I've already talked about, night feedings, which also can be developmentally normal for our younger infants, and too much parental intervention. So now let's look at how we solve some of the common sleep problems in infancy. First, we need to adjust the sleep environment to reflect the developmental needs of the infant. Generally speaking, the younger the infant, the more intervention he needs from his parents to fall asleep and get back to sleep. The older the infant, the less intervention he needs from his parents to fall asleep and get back to sleep. It can be helpful to adjust the infant's sleep environment accordingly, so that newborns and younger babies are kept in close proximity to parents. For example, are in the bassinet in the parent's room, and then are moved away into their own separate space in a crib as they grow older. Also, younger babies need to be put down on their backs in order to lower the risk of SIDS from occurring. But as babies develop the ability to roll onto their tummies, they can be left in that position or even put down in that position, as most babies actually prefer to sleep on their tummies. Finally, very young babies are not bothered by a lot of noise or stimulation, and in fact will even nod off in the face of becoming overstimulated. Around 4 months, however, babies lose this ability. This is what the 4-month sleep regression is all about, if you've ever heard that term. Around 4 months old, babies become much more easily stimulated by their environment, and as a result, start to wake up more frequently. For this reason, it's extremely important to adjust your baby's sleep environment accordingly, so that there's very little light, noise, or other stimulation in the sleeping environment. We can also adjust the sleep schedule to reflect the developmental needs of the infant. Generally speaking, the younger the infant, the more she will sleep during the day. But as she matures, frequent short naps should consolidate into fewer longer naps, so that by the time she reaches 6 months old, she should be having 2 naps per day and an earlier bedtime most of the time. This is called the 2-3-4 sleep schedule, which is written about in many sleep books. What this involves is putting your baby down for her morning nap 2 hours after she wakes up in the morning, putting her down for her afternoon nap 3 hours after she wakes up from her morning nap, and putting her to bed for the night 4 hours after she wakes up from her afternoon nap. By 6 months old, most babies are ready for this type of schedule and can continue on the schedule until well past a year. However, before 6 months old, babies may still require 3 or even 4 naps a day and will often have a later bedtime than older babies. Other sleep solutions include reducing or eliminating the parental presence when putting infants down to sleep or getting them back to sleep. This is really the key to both preventing and solving most common sleep issues in infancy as well as in older children. This is because while the parental presence is comforting and sleep-inducing to newborns and younger babies, it's actually stimulating to older babies who want to just play or interact with their caregivers rather than sleep. It also teaches the baby that he needs his parents' presence in order to fall asleep or get back down to sleep, even though he's perfectly capable of doing it on his own. The way you help a baby to learn how to fall asleep on her own is to teach her self-soothing skills by putting her down sleepy but awake. The idea here is that you do everything you would normally do to get your baby right to the edge of sleep, and then instead of waiting until she falls asleep in your arms or at the breast, you put her down very sleepy but awake and let her get herself to sleep. And I'm not going to lie, this often does involve some degree of fussing and crying, but this is the best way to teach these skills. Lastly, we want to eliminate night feedings when the doctor says it's okay. If your baby's gaining weight well and has been for quite some time, chances are he's ready to sleep through the night without being fed. It's not absolutely necessary to check with your baby's pediatrician before night weaning, but I find most parents have an easier time following through with that once they've gotten the go-ahead from the doctor. Moving on to our toddlers. Common sleep problems in toddlers, going from 2 naps to 1, transitioning from the crib to the bed, bottles at bedtime or nighttime, and lastly, parental intervention at bedtime, nap time, and through the night. So here are some common sleep solutions to toddler sleep problems. First of all, don't rush transitioning your toddler out of his crib. Unless your child is climbing out of the crib and therefore it's dangerous to keep him in the crib, there's really no developmental reason to move your toddler out of his crib until he understands how a big boy bed works, meaning he understands that he must stay in his bed through the night and during nap time. Don't force a nap if your toddler doesn't appear tired. You've probably heard it a million times before, but I'm going to say it again. You really can't force a child to nap if they aren't tired. Instead, you can have a quiet time and set up a quiet activity that the toddler can do by himself in his room. Alternatively, you can skip the nap and put him down for an earlier nap the next time he's having a nap, or an earlier bedtime. We shouldn't rush to eliminate naps either. Sometimes parents find their toddlers need to sleep during the middle of the day really inconvenient, which is totally understandable. However, if you rush to eliminate your toddler's nap before he's developmentally ready, you run the risk of having an tired, often cranky toddler, which in turn may interfere with his nighttime sleep as well. For this reason, it's best to follow your toddler's cues. If he doesn't seem sleepy at nap time anymore, go ahead and skip the nap. But if he does, it's best to keep the nap in his sleep schedule. You can go cold turkey when eliminating the bottle at bedtime, nap time, or through the night. Weaning your toddler off the bottle slowly will most likely just confuse her and make the process harder for her. Instead, you can simply get rid of the bottle and replace it with a cup of water that she can have sips of right before she falls asleep and upon waking up. Lastly, and perhaps most importantly, you need to maintain clear and consistent limits with your toddler. This can be quite challenging, as toddlers can be quite challenging and also demanding in their behavior. However, if we want our toddlers to sleep well, we must resist their demands to have us lie down with them while they fall asleep or while they get back to sleep, as it will only interfere with the quality of their sleep in the long run. Moving on to some common sleep problems during the preschool years, there's losing the nap, so going from one nap to none. There's co-sleeping, or the parental presence at bedtime. There's irregular sleep schedules, bedtime resistance. It naturally takes longer for preschoolers to fall asleep. And also nightmares and night terrors are more common during this time. So, looking at some common sleep solutions during the preschool years, you want to replace the quiet time with nap time. And also don't allow preschoolers to take cat naps or late afternoon naps, as this is just going to interfere with their bedtime. You want to maintain a regular bedtime even on the weekends. It's very tempting to let our kids stay up later on the weekends, especially when they get older. If we let them stay up on Friday and then Saturday, by the time Sunday rolls around, they're never going to want to go to bed, which doesn't make for a pleasant or productive Monday. If you must let your kids stay up later on the weekends, allow them to stay up a little bit later on Friday, but insist that they go to bed at the usual time on Saturday so that they'll be ready to go to bed at the usual time on Sunday. We also want to ensure that bedtime is early enough for them. I'm sorry, I think I'm skipping ahead here. Yeah, sorry. I'm talking about my preschoolers here. Sorry. I was talking about, sorry to confuse things. Okay, encourage self-sufficiency while falling asleep. So, as I mentioned earlier, preschoolers take longer to fall asleep than infants and toddlers. So they often call out during the period of time they're trying to fall asleep. They want their parents to entertain them or to help them fall asleep. You must try to resist this urge and instead encourage them to look at a book with a flashlight, listen to their breathing, or engage in other relaxation activities. Similarly, try not to give in to your preschoolers' bedtime resistance or stalling. One simple way to reduce bedtime resistance is to give your preschooler plenty of warnings ahead of time, so that they're going to have to stop what they're doing and head to bed. A consistent bedtime routine is also a helpful way for reducing bedtime stalling and resistance. And lastly, we want to be comforting our preschoolers upon waking up from nightmares, but not lingering in the room. Anytime our kids feel intense fear, it's important to provide them with comfort. However, when they have nightmares, we don't need to wait for them to fall back to sleep to leave the room, as this will just set up a pattern of them needing you to fall asleep even when they don't have nightmares. Rather than stay with them, you can leave them with something to cuddle in your absence. Okay, so now I want to talk about some of the common sleep problems in school-aged kids, which I started to talk about earlier. So this involves irregularity of sleep-wake schedules, later bedtimes, decreased nighttime sleep, anxiety, increased caffeine and sugar intake, and parental bedtime. Parental presence is still occurring in 30% of families at bedtime. Some common sleep solutions for children of this age are to maintain regular bedtimes on the weekends. And that's what I was talking about before. And it actually does apply to our preschool children as well. and of course will also apply to our adolescents. We also want to ensure that bedtime is early enough for our school-age kids to get at least 9 to 10 hours of sleep. We want to stay strong and not give in to bedtime resistance, excessive demands, or stalling. This is where limit setting comes in again. We need to learn how to tell our children no at bedtime. No extra snack, no extra show, no extra book, etc. Again, giving warnings ahead of time usually helps to decrease bedtime resistance and stalling. We're not going to allow caffeine or sugar before bedtime for obvious reasons, and similarly, it's important to limit screen use before bed, as this has been shown to affect the quality of sleep our children get. Instead, we want to encourage quiet play or reading about an hour before bedtime if possible. And again, we don't want to linger in our rooms, in our kids' rooms while they fall asleep or get back to sleep, as this will only interfere with their sleep independence and in turn affect the quality of their sleep. And finally, we want to be encouraging relaxation skills at bedtime and cognitive behavioral therapy, or CBT, for any anxiety-related issues our school-age children may develop. CBT teaches kids how to change anxiety-inducing thought patterns and behaviors to ones that are relaxing and sleep-inducing. This is something parents can teach their kids if they have a background in it, or they can hire a trained psychotherapist to teach their child these skills. Moving on to our adolescents, I want to just very briefly touch on adolescents. So since I know many of you don't yet have adolescents, these are some of the common sleep problems that adolescents develop. And here are some common sleep solutions to adolescents. Again, a lot of it is about limit setting. So you want to be setting a regular sleep schedule, a regular bedtime, making sure that adolescents don't go to bed too late, even on the weekends. Want to be limiting screen use and cell phone use, caffeine and sugar, encouraging lots of physical exercise to combat some of the sleepiness that can occur in adolescents during the day. And we can let them sleep in, but not let them have late naps, as this is just going to interfere with their bedtime and make them go to bed even later. So sleep training. A lot of times when people hear the phrase sleep training, they think of the cried out method, which is when you put your baby down in a crib alone and let them cry until they fall asleep. But in fact, the term sleep training refers to much, much more than that. Sleep training can be defined as any deliberate action a parent or caregiver takes to regulate a child's sleep pattern. So most of you are probably engaged in some form of sleep training right now. It's also important to note that no formal sleep training method is superior to another in terms of its effectiveness. So now let's look at some sleep training methods. This is what's called the sleep training continuum, which was adopted from a book called Bedtiming by Lewis and Granick. I have the reference for you at the end of the slides if you're interested in looking it up. Most formal sleep training methods exist at some point along this continuum. On the one side, you have no intervention by the parent, which is also known as the extinction method, where you literally do put a child in a room and let them cry until they fall asleep. And on the other side, you have intensive intervention, which is also known as bed sharing. Both the extinction method and bed sharing are forms of sleep training. And again, no formal sleep training method has been shown to be superior in terms of its effectiveness. So a lot of this really depends on you, your child, your values, and how you want to go about sleep training your child. These are the best sleep tips that I could come up with, having worked with hundreds of families and consulted hundreds of sleep-related journal articles, not to mention all the sleep books. So if you take anything from this presentation, this is probably a good one. These are the best sleep tips I have come across in my work. Using daylight and darkness to your advantage. Kids really respond to that. Maintaining clear and consistent bedtimes at consistent limits at bedtime and nap time. Pick a method and follow through with it so you can be consistent. Put babies down sleepy but awake as soon as they're ready, as soon as possible. Make the bedtime routine relaxing but not rigid. Allow sufficient time for self-soothing. Don't fix it if it isn't broken, which means if your child doesn't have a problem, there's no need to change anything. Don't compare your child's sleep to another child's sleep, as all children are different. Remember to prioritize your own sleep. I did want to say that there are some common sleep myths out there that it's important to, I think, clear up. Some common misconceptions, particularly about the cried out method and bed sharing. First of all, there is no evidence that crying within the context of sleep training is damaging to the attachment relationship, if you're wondering about that. That crying within the context of sleep training causes physical or psychological damage to children, or that bed sharing causes insecurity or psychological dependency in children. Here's just a quick slide on Beware of Sleep books. Sometimes they can do more harm than good, although there are a lot of good ones out there. Here is a slide on when to seek sleep support. That's when your child has persistent or severe sleep issues that are not responsive to some of the simple interventions that we've talked about tonight. Some of the simple behavioral interventions or adjustment to their bedtime and sleep routines. Also, when sleep problems are extremely disruptive to the infant, child, or you, or the functioning of the family. When anxiety is present in you, the child, or adolescent, the sleep problem appears to be or has become a sleep disorder. So here are some symptoms of sleep disorders, so you can review those on your own and decide whether or not the issue that you're dealing with is a sleep problem or a sleep disorder. And here's who to contact for common sleep problems in our children, our infants, toddlers, and children. When you have a sleep problem on your hands, you can contact a registered therapist, such as a psychologist, a psychotherapist, an occupational therapist, or a social worker who has special training and experience treating sleep problems in children and families. For sleep disorders, it's best to contact a pediatrician or family doctor first. And I have a little phrase here about being careful of unqualified sleep coaches. There are many of them out there, and they may have particular training in sleep itself, but oftentimes these sleep coaches don't have an adequate background foundation. So it's important just to be aware of the background that some of these sleep coaches have. These are some of the references that I've drawn upon to create this presentation. And now I want to turn to the question and answer period of this presentation. I want to thank you first, though, for being so attentive and listening to my voice, which, as you can tell, is actually fading present. So now let's hear from you and any questions that you might have.
So we just got a question in from someone listening on the line. So the question came from an individual who wants to know that she tries to put her baby to bed in her crib, sleepy but awake, and she gets really upset immediately. So she only wants to sleep while breastfeeding. The mother tries to soothe her, but each time she goes into the crib, it's the same thing. Mom wants to know if she should let her cry. When she's asleep, she stays asleep, but I'm afraid if I let her cry, that will change. The child is 8 months old.
Jennifer, that's an excellent question. I'm sure a lot of parents have that. I'm glad you indicated what age she's at, because that'll help me answer the question. So this is very common, a very common issue. And what I suggest doing is nursing her almost to the point where she's nearly asleep, but she's not quite asleep, and then popping her off, and then putting her down in the crib and saying night-night, night-night. I get that sometimes they still wake up. And that's okay. Yes, you can let her cry. And you can do this many different ways. If you're comfortable letting her cry for 5 minutes, 10 minutes, you can let her cry for that amount of time. If you're not comfortable with that amount of time, you can start with a shorter interval and gradually get more and more. I have to gradually get longer and longer where you're letting her cry for longer and longer periods of time. You can consult Ferber for this method. I have to say, with an 8-month-old, you might have to give it more time than just 2 minutes or 5 minutes. You might want to give it 10 to 15 minutes and even up to 20 minutes to let her get herself down. It's perfectly safe to do this.
Thank you so much, Emmy. That was a great answer, and that's a great question. Our next question is, how do you know if your baby is falling asleep independently? Does that mean you can put them down completely awake and when they just fall asleep by themselves? When should that typically occur?
Also, really good question. So typically speaking, most babies don't go from perfectly awake to perfectly asleep all by themselves. They need help getting down. So we can rock them, we can nurse them, we can do whatever we need to do, whatever is most sleep-inducing for them at their age, to get them to the point where they're very, very sleepy, but again, not asleep. So when you put them down and they're very, very sleepy, but they're awake, and then you leave and they're able to fall asleep on their own, they're able to go from very sleepy to sleep, that is a sign that they are capable of falling asleep independently. So what's important here is that when your baby is falling asleep, you're not there and they know you're not there. That is the big, that is what you want to really, that distinguishes between whether or not a baby is falling asleep independently or not, whether or not they know you're there when they're falling asleep. When does this normally occur? It really, really varies, I have to say. As you saw in my tips and some of my solutions for solving common sleep problems, the earlier you try to do this, the better. Meaning you can experiment right now with your baby who's maybe 3 months, 4 months. You can see, okay, she's very sleepy. Let's try to put her down. We've never done it before, but let's just try. Let's just give her a moment to settle. Let's see what happens. And you never know what'll happen. Maybe your baby will be able to get herself down. But we need to give them the opportunity to try to get themselves down. And oftentimes parents make the mistake of just not giving them that chance.
It's a really difficult question to ask, but thank you, Emmy, so much for taking the time to answer them. Our next question is, my son is 23 months old, and he wakes up 3 times during the night. We give him a 7-ounce bottle of formula each time and he falls back asleep. We were told it may be because he goes to bed hungry, but we noticed it doesn't make a difference whether he's full or not. Is this normal for his age?
So one of the big reasons why I wanted to go over the developmental stages and what typical sleep looks like during the stage is so you could compare your child's sleep to what a typical sleep pattern looks like for your child's age. So a 23-month-old would be considered to be an older toddler. And by 23 months old, toddlers are perfectly capable of going through the night without feeding. And in fact, if the toddler is feeding during the night, it probably is disrupting his sleep. So my suggestion is that you make sure that your toddler is getting the majority of his food during the day and having a nice full dinner and then putting him down. He does not need to eat during the night, and in fact, is probably interfering with his sleep.
The next question we have is when to give up on the newborn rock and play sleeper in parents' bedroom and move on, to the crib in the baby's nursery room. Child is 4 months old, sleeps in the sleeper, does not fall asleep for naps, is placed in the crib.
This is also very common. Younger babies, we're talking about the newborns and the 3 to 6 month olds, they like to nap on the go. They like to nap with a lot of physical proximity. They like to nap with a lot of motion, and that's normal. So if your child likes to sleep this way, that's okay. You don't need to rush your child into an environment where that's more still or silent for naps. You need to start to structure your child's naps. And what I mean by structure is put them in a quiet space in a crib as they get older. And you can look for signs. So you can see, I used to be able to put my baby in a swing and he would fall right to sleep for his naps. And now it just seems to keep him up. Well, that might be a sign that he's outgrowing whatever contraption that was getting him to sleep before. And now he needs a more still environment to fall asleep. And that is a normal part of development that happens. Our younger babies really like a lot of motion to fall asleep during the day. Our older babies, it starts to interfere with their sleep. So it's really going to be up to you. You're going to need to follow your baby's cues to see, how is this sleep inducing to my baby, or is this starting to really interfere with their sleep? Once it does, then you know that you need to start moving them to the crib.
We're just coming to the end of our presentation, so we have 2 more questions we're going to try to get to. If you do send in a question after we've kind of indicated we're finished for the evening, we'll do our best to try to email you the answer to your question.
Yeah, and I did want to mention too, before I answer the last two questions, before you all sign off for the night, that my contact information is in this slide presentation. And I am more than happy to answer any questions that you have. Just send me an email. I'm at WholePlay. You can contact me at my website, and you can also send me an email. So I'd be more than happy to answer any questions that you have. But yes, I will answer these last two questions.
So next question is, sometimes my daughter, 5.5 months old, wakes up in the middle of the night. She really wants to fall asleep, but she's whiny. By putting her on the breast doesn't really soothe her. Neither does rocking, neither does changing her diaper. Any tips on what to do? Right now, I just hold her for an hour and a half until she falls asleep.
So rocking doesn't soothe her, feeding her doesn't soothe her, and changing her diaper doesn't soothe her. Have you tried singing or shushing or patting? Those methods could help her to fall asleep. An hour and a half of her just being wide awake seems unusual for a 5.5-month-old. I would suggest trying some of those other methods, the shushing, the patting, the singing, seeing if that helps. If not, she may really just be ready to be put down and to be left alone. She may be telling you, you know what, I don't need you to hold me. I need you to put me down, and that's really going to be the best thing for me to fall asleep.
And our last question for this evening is as follows. I have an older toddler, 32 months, and he has had sleep problems at every age of development. Currently, he fights bedtime, and we don't know how else to set limits. He climbs out of his bed, makes excuses about going to bed, sometimes for hours after his bedtime. So bed at 7 o'clock, he's up at 9 o'clock, sometimes as late as 11. No matter what time he goes to bed, he gets up at 5:30 a.m. I worry that he never catches up on his sleep and only sleeps the bare minimum or slightly less than minimum for his age.
Okay. And
32 months.
32 months. Okay, so he's just shy of turning 3. This is tough. This is really tough. I had a private client who had a similar situation recently. And what makes it so tough is that they're capable of getting out of bed and really testing the limits, but they're still not cognitively really understanding a lot of the limits that you're trying to set for them. So really the best thing I have to say is that you need to be really, really consistent with your bedtime routine, your bedtime, your sleep schedule, and you have to make sure when he's climbing out of his bed, you're taking him back to bed every single time. You're not giving him attention or rewards for coming out of bed. You're not making it into a game, and you're just really consistently setting and holding and maintaining the limits for him. That's the only way he's going to learn.
It's a really tough question to end on, so thank you so much, Emmy. We did get a question about if there's a copy of the slides available. This presentation will be posted on the Children's Support Solutions website and will be available for you to view as often as you'd like through there. So feel free to visit our website, and you'll be able to find this presentation as well as a number of others available there. As Emmy mentioned, you can contact her through her website, www.wholeplay.ca. You can also reach her via email at info@wholeplay.ca, as well as at the telephone number indicated, 647-704-6630, and you can always search for her on Google through WholePlay. We're so excited and so glad to have had Emmy here to join us this evening, and thank you to all of you for joining us. Have a wonderful evening.